Cora, he breathed. This is incredible. It's better than the bank in town. She immediately shrank back into her role, the moment of confidence vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. She waved a dismissive hand, her voice returning to its softer, hesitant tone. It is just neat handwriting is all. I am glad to be of help. She quickly stood and busied herself with the dishes, her heart hammering. She had shown too much of herself. It was a dangerous slip. Yet that small shared moment became a turning point. Elias began to leave the account books on the table for her, a silent invitation. It became their unspoken ritual. He would handle the physical strength of the ranch, and she would handle the numbers, the hidden architecture of its business. This secret partnership made her feel closer to him than any of her forced attempts at cooking ever could. She was contributing. She was useful. And with each passing day, the cold fear in her stomach was warmed by a new, terrifying feeling. She was falling in love. She loved the solid, dependable weight of Elias's presence. She loved the sound of the children's laughter echoing through the house. She loved the stark beauty of the Montana sunset. This life, this pretend life, began to feel more real than any she had ever known. The ghost of the real Cora Miller and the threatening shadow of the man she fled from in Boston began to feel like a story from someone else's life. But late at night, lying awake in the dark, the guilt would return. She was living a beautiful lie in a house built on honesty. She was stealing the love of a good man and two innocent children under a false name. The weight of her secret was immense, and she knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that it could not stay hidden forever. The truth always has a way of finding the light. A small town like Silver Creek operated on a currency of observation and conversation. The arrival of Elias Thorne's mail-order bride had been the most exciting event in months, and every aspect of the woman known as Cora was subject to gentle but relentless scrutiny. At church socials, she was polite but distant, often found on the periphery rather than in the bustling center of conversations about quilting patterns or preserving recipes. When Mrs. Gable, the postmaster's wife, asked her opinion on the best stitch for darning a wool sock, Cora's answer had been so strangely theoretical and bookish that it was discussed for a full week afterwards. She was kind, certainly, and the Thorne children clearly adored her, but there was an otherness about her that the town could not quite place. It was not just that she was from the city, it was something else entirely. The whispers began as a faint rustle like dry leaves skittering across a porch. They were never meant to be cruel, merely curious. Did you hear she tried to churn butter with a whisk? Someone said she called the cattle bovines when she thought no one was listening. Old Mr. Peterson claimed he saw her sitting on the fence rail not watching the sunset, but calculating the angle of its descent with a concentration he'd only ever seen in a surveyor. The general consensus was that Elias Thorne's new wife was a very pretty enigma, a woman who seemed to be playing a part in a play she hadn't quite memorized the lines for. The mystery of her became a quiet pastime, a puzzle the community worked on together without ever meaning to solve it. These whispers inevitably reached Elias. He heard the murmurs at the general store, the good-natured but persistent teasing at the blacksmith shop. His neighbors would clap him on the shoulder and ask how his fine city wife was adjusting to the hardscrabble life. There was a tone sometimes, a hint of pity or doubt that set his teeth on edge. Elias was a man who valued straightforwardness above all else, and the subtle judgment of the town felt like a criticism of his choice, a challenge to his family's happiness. His defense of her was immediate and fierce. He would straighten to his full height, his kind eyes turning hard. "My wife is adapting just fine," he would say, his voice leaving no room for argument. "She's smart as a whip and the best thing to happen to me and my children. I'll thank you to remember that." His loyalty was a solid wall built around her, and he stood before it, a steadfast guardian against any hint of gossip. Elara, living in her private world of fear, was acutely aware of the scrutiny. She felt the curious eyes upon her in town, saw the quick smiles that didn't quite reach people's eyes. It made her want to retreat further into the safety of the ranch's boundaries. Elias's unwavering defense, however, was a profound and painful gift. Every time he stood up for Cora Miller, he was standing up for a ghost, protecting a lie. The warmth of his protection was followed by a chilling wave of guilt. She was causing this. She was making this good, honest man defend a fiction, potentially damaging his standing in the community he loved. She wanted to be worthy of his faith, but she knew the person he believed her to be did not exist. The pressure of the double life was a constant ache. It was into this atmosphere of quiet suspicion that a new element was introduced. A sleek black buggy pulled by a single tired-looking horse rolled into Silver Creek. The man who stepped down from it was dressed in a suit that was too fine for Montana dust. He carried a leather satchel that looked official and imposing. He introduced himself as Mr. Harrington, a territorial tax assessor. He was polite, his smile practiced and without warmth. He took a room at the boarding house and began asking questions about land values, herd sizes, and property lines. He was just doing his job, he said, but his eyes, sharp and calculating, missed nothing. He noted the wealth of the land, the success of the ranches, with a gaze that felt less like assessment and more like acquisition. To Elara, watching from her place in the shadows, his arrival felt like the first dark cloud on a clear horizon. He represented the world of paperwork and powerful men she had fled from. His presence in her new sanctuary felt like a terrible omen, a threat she could not name but deeply felt, and it made the stone of fear in her stomach grow cold and heavy. Mr. Harrington's presence in Silver Creek quickly shifted from a novelty to a deep and pervasive worry. He was not a man who simply did his job. He was a man who enjoyed the power it afforded him. He moved through the town with an air of unearned superiority, his fine clothes a silent criticism of the hard-wearing work shirts and dungarees of the ranchers. He took long, slow walks around people's properties, making notes in a little book without asking permission. He questioned the children playing in the street about their father's businesses. The entire town felt a collective unease, a sense of being sized up for a price tag they had not agreed to. The easy camaraderie of the community was replaced by a watchful tension. The purpose of his visit was made official when flyers were posted around town, calling for a mandatory meeting at the schoolhouse. Every landowner was required to attend. That evening, the small building was packed with anxious men and women, their faces grim in the flickering light of the oil lamps. Elias sat with Elara near the back, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. He could feel the nervous tension radiating from her. Mr. Harrington stood at the front, his posture perfectly erect. He gave a short, condescending speech about civic duty and the complexities of modern governance. Then he began to pass out thick packets of paper. The documents were a nightmare of dense, tiny print and convoluted legal phrases. They were filled with charts and formulas that seemed designed to confuse. Harrington explained the new tax code in a smooth, patronizing voice. He pointed to paragraphs filled with words like amortization and proportional valuation. He used phrases that twisted back on themselves, making simple concepts seem impossibly complex. The ranchers, men and women of action and practical skill, stared at the papers in growing confusion and dismay. The bottom line, which Harrington saved for last with a theatrical pause, was a number so large it sucked the air from the room. It was an impossible sum. For Elias, the figure represented more than a debt. It represented the loss of his herd, the auction of his land, the end of everything his family had built for generations. A sickening silence fell over the room, broken only by the rustle of paper as people searched the documents for some mistake, some hope they could not find. Elias felt the world tilt beneath his feet. He looked down at the numbers, his mind so capable with the tangible realities of ranch life, rebelling against the abstract cruelty of the figures. This was not an assessment. It was an execution by paperwork. He saw the same despair on the faces of his friends and neighbors. They were all being robbed, and the law in the form of this smug man in a suit was holding the gun. Harrington's smile was thin and victorious. He could see he had won. These simple people were outmatched by the weapon of bureaucracy. The payments will be due in full within 30 days, he stated, his voice cutting through the heavy silence. I suggest you begin making arrangements. Elara watched the scene unfold as if in a terrible dream. This was the world she had escaped. This was the kind of clever, heartless predation she knew all too well. She saw the color drain from Elias's face, saw the light of hope in his eyes extinguish and replaced by a hollow defeat. She saw the children of the town, her own Samuel and Lily included, looking up at their parents' frightened faces, not understanding the disaster looming over them. The vast Montana sky stretched endlessly above the Thorne ranch, a boundless blue ceiling over a sea of golden grass. For Elias Thorne, the beauty of his land was a constant companion, but it was a lonely one. His days began before sunrise and ended long after dusk, filled with the honest work of tending cattle and mending fences. He was a strong man, both in body and spirit, yet his quiet homestead echoed with a silence that work could not fill. It was the silence left behind after his wife's passing, a quiet that was most profound in the eyes of his two young children, Samuel and Lily. They needed more than he could give. They needed a mother's laughter, a mother's comfort, a mother's love. One evening, after tucking his children into bed, Elias sat at his rough-hewn kitchen table with a well-worn catalog. The pages contained advertisements from women back east, women seeking new beginnings as mail-order brides in the Western Territories. It felt like a desperate gamble to seek a partner through printed words and promised portraits. Yet the deeper loneliness, the one that ached in his heart and worried for his children's future, pushed him to take the chance. He drafted his own advertisement with a careful hand, describing his life as a rancher, his two sweet children, and his desire for a woman of strong character and honest heart. He mailed the letter with a silent prayer, sending his hope out into the world. Weeks later, an envelope postmarked from Boston arrived. The handwriting on the letter inside was elegant and precise. The woman introduced herself as Cora Miller. She wrote of a desire for open spaces and a simple life, far from the crowded city. Her words were thoughtful and kind, expressing a gentle nature and a keen mind. She asked perceptive questions about the children and the rhythms of ranch life. With each letter they exchanged, Elias found himself more captivated by the thoughtful woman emerging from the pages. She seemed intelligent and compassionate, exactly the sort of influence he wanted for his family. He formally proposed marriage through the mail, and she accepted. A new energy filled the Thorne ranch. Elias, usually so serious, found himself smiling as he whitewashed the walls of the spare bedroom. Samuel and Lily, caught up in their father's excitement, polished the floors until they shone and picked wildflowers for the kitchen table. They talked endlessly about the mysterious Cora who was coming to live with them. Their anticipation was a tangible thing, weaving through the rooms of the house, chasing away the shadows of loneliness. Elias looked at his children's hopeful faces and felt a surge of protectiveness and optimism. He was not just getting a wife. He was building a family again. Everything was ready. All they had to do was wait for the stagecoach to bring their future to them. The air in Silver Creek was sharp and clear on the day the stagecoach was due. Elias had hitched his best wagon, the one with the sturdy bench and the clean canvas cover. Samuel and Lily sat beside him, their faces scrubbed bright and their Sunday clothes neatly pressed. They fidgeted with a mixture of excitement and nervous energy, their eyes fixed on the dusty road leading into town. The usual quiet of the remote settlement was broken by the distant rumble of wheels and the distinct call of the coachman's horn. Elias felt his own heart give a solid thump against his ribs. This was it, the moment that would change all their lives. A cloud of dust announced the coach's arrival before the vehicle itself came into view, rolling to a stop with a great creaking of wood and jangling of harnesses. The door swung open. A few tired-looking travelers stepped down, stretching their legs and blinking in the afternoon sun. Then she appeared. The woman moved hesitantly, one hand holding a modest carpet bag, the other lifting the hem of her dress just enough to clear the step. She was slight of frame, with hair the color of dark honey tucked neatly under a simple bonnet. She was prettier than he had imagined, but her eyes, a wide and startling shade of green, held a nervousness that was almost fearful. They darted around the small gathering of townsfolk, never settling for long. Elias approached, suddenly aware of his own large, work-roughened hands. He removed his hat. "Miss Cora Miller?" he asked, his voice softer than he intended. She flinched almost imperceptibly at the name before offering a timid smile. "Yes, and you must be Mr. Thorne." Her voice was polite, educated, but it carried a faint tremor. She looked past him to the children, who were now hiding shyly behind his legs. Her expression softened. "And you must be Samuel and Lily. I have been so very eager to meet you both." The ride back to the ranch was mostly quiet, filled with the sounds of the wagon and the horses. Elias pointed out landmarks, trying to fill the silence. She nodded, her responses brief and polite. She seemed to be studying everything, the vastness of the land, the towering mountains in the distance, with an expression of awe mixed with something else he could not quite name. It was not the eager curiosity he had expected from her letters. It looked more like overwhelm, perhaps even apprehension. Once at the house, her city upbringing became unmistakably clear. She marveled at the pump in the kitchen. Having never drawn water from one before, the crackle of the hearth fire made her jump. When Elias mentioned the chicken coop, she looked genuinely alarmed. He found it curiously charming. This was clearly a woman unused to ranch life, and her vulnerability stirred a deep desire in him to shelter and provide for her. Her gentle manner with the children was undeniable. She listened intently to their chatter, and her nervousness seemed to melt away when she spoke to them. Watching her, Elias felt a surge of certainty. The journey had been long. She was tired and out of her element. She just needed time. He was sure the confident, witty woman from the letters was still there, waiting to emerge once she felt safe and at home. The rhythm of life on the Thorne Ranch settled into a new, albeit slightly offbeat, pattern. The woman known as Cora worked tirelessly from dawn until dusk, her every movement a careful performance. Each day was a tightrope walk between maintaining her disguise and tending to the new life she was growing to cherish more than she ever thought possible. The fear of discovery was a cold stone permanently lodged in her stomach, a constant companion that made her jump at a slamming door or go quiet when someone entered a room unexpectedly. She lived in two worlds. One was the physical world of the ranch, of kneading stubborn bread dough and trying to remember the complicated steps to doing laundry with a scrub board and a bar of harsh lye soap. The other was the world inside her mind, a place of quiet panic and calculated lies, where she had to constantly remember the fictional history of Cora Miller, a seamstress from Boston. Her failures in the kitchen became a gentle joke in the household. The biscuits she produced could have been used to shore up a fence post. The stew was often undersalted or, on one memorable occasion, so overwhelmingly peppery that even the dogs hesitated to eat it. Elias would just smile his patient smile and say, "We'll try again tomorrow, Cora." His kindness was both a balm and a torment. She did not feel she deserved it. Samuel and Lily, with the boundless acceptance of children, simply saw the effort. They would pat her flour-dusted hand and tell her their papa's biscuits were sometimes hard too. A sweet lie she appreciated deeply. Her interactions with them were the only times she felt she could breathe easily. She did not have to pretend with them. She could simply be present, reading stories by the fire, or helping Lily arrange her wildflower collections. She taught Samuel how to draw complex mazes on a slate, a game that delighted him, though he never questioned where a simple seamstress learned such things. Where her true nature could not help but reveal itself was in the realm of numbers. One evening, Elias was sprawled at the kitchen table, surrounded by a chaotic jumble of ledgers and invoices. He ran a frustrated hand through his hair, muttering under his breath about feed costs and cattle prices. The columns of numbers were a tangled mess, and he could not make his profits and expenses align. Cora hovered nearby, wiping an already clean counter. She could see the error from across the room. It was a simple transposition of numbers, a tiny mistake with large consequences. The urge to correct it, to bring order to the chaos, was a physical itch in her fingers. Finally, she could stand it no longer. "Elias," she said softly, "forgive me for speaking out of turn, but would you allow me to look? I have always had a knack for figures. I used to help my father with his accounts." It was another lie, woven seamlessly into her story. Elias, tired and exasperated, pushed the ledger toward her with a sigh. "Be my guest, darlin'. I'm about to toss the whole lot in the cook stove." She sat down, picked up a pencil, and her entire demeanor changed. The nervousness fell away. Her posture straightened. Her eyes, usually so watchful and wary, now focused on the pages with an intense, sharp clarity. Her hand moved with swift, certain strokes, cross-referencing invoices, re-adding columns, and neatly noting discrepancies. In less than an hour, she had not only found his error, but had completely reorganized the ledger into a clear, logical system that showed his finances with perfect clarity. Elias stared at the pages, then at her, his expression a mixture of awe and pure astonishment. Her own fear, the constant companion that had lived in her heart for months, was suddenly drowned out by a roaring, protective fury. A choice crystallized before her, stark and simple. She could remain silent, safe in her disguise, and watch the man she loved lose everything. Or she could speak. She could use the very mind she had been hiding to fight this injustice. To speak would be to shatter her life into 1,000 pieces. To stay silent would be to shatter her heart. She looked at Elias's bowed head and she knew there was no choice at all. The secret would have to end. A profound and hopeless silence had settled over the schoolhouse. It was the sound of defeat. Ranchers stared at their hands, at the floor, anywhere but at the triumphant face of Mr. Harrington or the devastating papers that spelled their ruin. Elias Thorne sat utterly still, his broad shoulders slumped under a weight no man should have to bear. He was already calculating what to sell first, which piece of his heritage would be the first to be auctioned off. He did not notice the woman beside him slowly rise to her feet. Her movement was not hesitant or nervous. It was deliberate, a ship setting its course into a storm. All eyes in the room turned to her. A few people whispered, confused. What could Elias's quiet wife possibly do? Elara walked to the front of the room with a posture no one in Silver Creek had ever seen. The nervous hunch of her shoulders was gone. Her head was held high. She moved with a purpose that was both graceful and absolute. She ignored Mr. Harrington's look of amused contempt. Without a word, she picked up a piece of chalk from the ledge of the blackboard. She turned to face the complicated equations Harrington had written to justify his theft. For a long moment, she simply studied them. The room held its breath. Then her hand began to move. The soft scratch of the chalk was the only sound in the absolute stillness. What happened next unfolded like a magic trick. Her hand flew across the blackboard, not with erasures of anger, but with the precise, confident strokes of absolute understanding. Numbers and symbols flowed from her piece of chalk, surrounding Harrington's work, dissecting it and exposing its rotten core. "Your formula is flawed in its very foundation," she said, and her voice was different. The gentle, hesitant cadence of Cora was gone. In its place was a clear, authoritative tone that carried to every corner of the room, a voice used to lecturing and being heard. "You have applied a commercial property depreciation rate to agricultural land, which is a direct violation of the territorial land use statutes." Chalk circled a offending number. She moved on, her logic a swift and unstoppable river. "Furthermore, you've double-counted the acreage by including the designated riparian zones along the creek beds. Those are protected land grants, not taxable assets." With every sentence, with every perfectly executed calculation, the impossible debt on the paper began to crumble into dust. Mr. Harrington's smug smile had vanished. His face was first red with annoyance, then pale with dawning horror. He tried to interrupt, to bluster, but his words were meaningless against the fortress of her facts. She was not just arguing. She was teaching. She was dismantling his entire scheme with the effortless ease of a master, taking apart a child's simple puzzle. The ranchers, who moments before had been defeated, now leaned forward, their eyes wide. They did not understand all the numbers, but they understood the language of truth. They saw the lies being exposed in plain white chalk. They saw their futures being given back to them. When she finished, the blackboard was a tapestry of stunning mathematical proof. The final figure, the actual tax owed, was a small, fair number. Elara placed the chalk down softly. The silence now was electric, filled with awe and utter confusion. She turned slowly to face the crowd, but her eyes found only one person. Elias was staring at her, his expression a turbulent sea of shock, disbelief, and a dawning, heartbreaking betrayal. The woman he loved had just vanished before his eyes, replaced by a brilliant stranger. She took a shaky breath, the confidence fading to reveal the terrible cost of this victory. "My name," she said, her voice trembling for the first time, but still clear and strong, "is not Cora Miller." The gasps in the room were sharp in unison. She told them everything. The death of her friend, the fear that drove her, the powerful man she was hiding from, the lie she had lived every single day. She laid her secret bare before the entire town, finishing with her eyes locked on Elias. "I am so sorry. My name is Elara Vance." And with those words, the life she had built in Silver Creek seemed to explode into a million pieces around her. The silence that followed Elara's confession was heavier than any that had come before. It was filled with the echoes of her words and the stunned disbelief of every person in the room. She stood before them, completely exposed, waiting for the anger, the rejection, the shouts of accusation to begin. She saw the confusion on the faces of her neighbors, the dawning understanding of all her oddities. Most of all, she saw the raw hurt in Elias's eyes, a pain she had put there. Without another word, she walked out of the schoolhouse, her head held high not in pride, but in acceptance of the consequences she knew she must now face. The door swung shut behind her, leaving a town in turmoil in her wake. She went directly to the small bedroom she had shared with a dream that was now over. Mechanically, she began to pack her few belongings into the same carpet bag she had arrived with. Each item was a memory. A ribbon Lily had given her. A smooth stone Samuel had found for her. She folded the simple dresses Elias had bought for her, her hands trembling. She had known this day would come, but the reality of it was a physical ache. She had not just lied to a man. She had lied to a family. She had fallen in love with them, and in doing so, had betrayed them in the deepest way. She could hear the murmur of voices from the town meeting dispersing outside. She did not want to see their stares. She just wanted to be gone before the children could see her leave. The door creaked open. Elias stood there, his large frame filling the doorway. He did not look angry. He looked weary and sad and deeply thoughtful. He stepped inside, his eyes taking in the half-packed bag on the bed. "You lied to me," he said. His voice was quiet, a statement of fact, not an accusation. Every single day, Elara whispered, unable to meet his gaze, her own fixed on the floor.
"I am so sorry, Elias. I never meant to hurt you."
"Any of you?" He was silent for a long time, simply watching her. "You lied about your name. You lied about your past. You lied about your cooking," he said, and a faint, sad smile touched his lips. "But today you told the truth. The whole truth when it would have been easier to keep quiet. You stood up for this town. You saved my home. You were the only honest person in that room tonight." He took a step closer. "The woman in those letters, the one who was so kind and so smart, the one who made me laugh. Was that her? Or was that you?" Elara finally looked up, her eyes swimming with tears. "That was me," she said, her voice breaking. "The truth of who I am was in those letters. The name was just wrong." Elias nodded slowly, looking out the window toward the land he loved, the land she had just fought for. He understood the fear that could drive a person to hide. He understood the difference between a lie told for malice and a secret kept for survival. "A name is just a word," he said finally, his voice firm and clear. "It's a title, but what you did tonight, that was action. That was character. That's the hard truth I care about. That's the woman I fell in love with." He held out his hand, a simple, profound gesture of forgiveness and choice. "The children will be waiting. They will need to learn your real name. Come on home, Elara." And the woman who was no longer a mail-order bride but simply herself placed her hand in his. She walked out of the room not as a fugitive, but as a woman returning to her family. The news of her true identity would ripple through Silver Creek for weeks, not as a scandal, but as the legend of the brilliant stranger who had saved the town. And Elara Vance, finally free of her secret, built a life on that solid foundation of truth and love, cherished not for who she was supposed to be, but for who she truly was. The end.